I want to be able to share this.
Sharing it.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Marissa Bagg here with my sister and NBC6 colleague, Julia Bagg. We're going to be talking about the baby formula shortage that has been such an issue for so many parents and babies and families out there. So we just want to be able to bring on some experts, bring on some moms, answer your questions. So if you're watching, please just sit down, get comfortable. We're excited to be able to discuss this very important issue with you. Right, Jules?
Yeah, we are. I mean, we know so many parents are concerned with this, not just here in South Florida, but around the country. And thankfully, we know that more shipments of formula are headed into the US this week from overseas, particularly from Europe, from Germany. So our eyes are on that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think the first shipment arrived on Sunday in Indiana, and then there's another one scheduled for tomorrow. So I know, Julia, you've been to several stores. I have as well. Not that we have newborns right now, but just when we're out and about, we're looking on shelves just to see what we're finding. And unfortunately, we see it, that there's not a lot of formula out there, and that it's even more difficult to find specialized formula. Anybody who has an allergy or needs to get a very specific mixture, it's harder to find those. So we've seen it for ourselves, even though, we don't have little ones in the home just yet that need formula, but we certainly understand what it's like to have to feed a baby and how precious and important that is. And so we are certainly empathetic of anyone who's out there that's dealing with this right now.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and just the stress of it, right, Marissa? Knowing that your baby is eating enough, getting the nutrients he or she needs, and just eating well.
And I've covered this story for the last couple of weeks, so we know that it has been going on for almost a month now. There's one mom that I've been in touch with who has a 3-month-old little baby, and I know that she's been dealing with this every single day. I want to go ahead and invite her in because she's going to be part of the discussion. Her name is Alexandra Moskowitz. She lives in North Bay Village. She has a little 3-month-old named Dylan, who I actually got to meet in person last week, and he is just the cutest. There he is. Oh my goodness. I think he was 14 weeks last week, so he's coming up on 15 weeks this week. And Alexandra, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for letting us share your story so that other moms who are out there can just, understand that they're not alone. So just kind of take us through what the last few weeks have been for you trying to get a hold of that very specific baby formula that you need. Oh, Alexandra muted just for a moment, so let's give her a second. I know she's also a working mom, so she's trying to get herself together to go to work. But while we wait, when I last spoke to her, well, we've been speaking almost every day or in touch every day. Her son, coming home from the hospital, was on formula, and I know he had some trouble in the beginning. Julia, I don't know if you've heard the specific story, but that they had to try a few different kinds of formula because he was having reflux issues. So for any parent out there who's dealt with that, I know that you've probably heard of this, right? Where babies are unable to keep that food down. Does that sound right, Alexandra? I know you all were dealing with that in the beginning. If you want to talk about those hardships first.
Yeah, my son was on formula and it just wasn't agreeing with him. He has an allergy to the cow's milk. So, he was not gaining weight due to the excessive spitting up, the reflux. So therefore we had to switch him to the hypoallergenic formula, which thankfully agrees with him and kind of solved a lot of the issues. He's healthy, he's gaining weight. But then of course, now with the shortage, getting your hands on that is the stressful part.
And you've had some help with that. I know your husband has been going almost daily. You've had family in other states, friends in other states trying to reach out and help you out. Kind of talk about the lengths that you've gone through to try to just get your baby fed.
I mean, during times of desperation and, as a mom, you'll do whatever you have to for your kid. Um, Unfortunately, it's like out of our control as moms and parents, and, we can't really do anything. So the best I can do is just advocate and reach out to any resource I can. So, like you said, I have family in New York. Thankfully, they've been able to get their hands on some. So, but then they're shipping it. It's the wait time and um, just spreading the news. I have people at work looking, and it's so nice because, like you guys said, like when you go to the supermarkets, you guys are looking. It's really great how everyone's coming together. But we have family all over South Florida looking, and with making this more known to people and spreading the word, it really has been helpful because I posted on my social media, and people that I haven't necessarily spoken to in a long time, or kind of reached out to me and said, hey, like, what's the formula, send me a picture, I'll be on the lookout, and things like that. It's just really nice to know that people are looking for us and that we're all working together.
Absolutely. And Alexandra, how much formula do you have left right now for Dylan?
Well, the last time I spoke to Marissa, it was like a week, and it seems that every time it's like I'm staying consistently at a week's worth, which is okay. But like I've gotten to the point where I'm okay with that for now. Obviously, I would like to have more, but thankfully, like we used a can, and then we got a friend from New York sent a can. So I'm like staying at a steady week's worth. But again, it's still stressful to know, like, okay, what happens, God forbid, like we can't replenish that can, and as a mom, you're like concerned, and do I switch to puree sooner? Things like this start to cross your mind. So
Sure. And I mean, it's like you're living week to week, literally, right, on what's left of formula.
yeah, exactly. It's like a really scary feeling, to say, okay, like we have 7 days of like peace of mind, but then like it's really not that long in the grand scheme of things, and it goes quickly. And as of recently, my son has increased his intake. We upped his ounces that he takes, so we're going through it quicker. So at the beginning, 3 weeks ago, when this was like really becoming an issue for us, he was only at like 4.5 ounces, and now we're up to 6 ounces. And yeah, it's only like 1.5 ounces more, but for each bottle, it's adding up throughout the day. So the can's not lasting as long.
Well, Alexandra, I know you're headed to work soon. You only have so much time. So I want to go ahead and bring in our expert, our pediatrician, so that you can ask a question or two while you still have time. So let's go ahead and introduce Dr. Mona Amin. She's a pediatrician with Pediatric Associates in Fort Lauderdale, and just a wealth of knowledge when it comes to this shortage. And I know you've dealt with so many patients who have been asking you questions. Just thank you for joining us today and for your precious time. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. And Alexandra, I'm so sorry that you're going through this along with all the other parents that are going through this right now. It is not something that I ever expected that I would see in my pediatric lifetime as a practicing pediatrician in the United States. We are a developed country. This really should not have happened. I know that's hard to hear, but this is something that I hope will change for the future, that we can get a lot of changes made so that this doesn't ever happen again. So I think this was a very difficult time, and I hope that change will come. And I missed one thing. How old is your child? I heard about obviously the medical issues, but how old is he?
He is 3.5 months.
Okay, 3.5 months. That's great, just for me to know.
Right, which, doctor, that's the critical time, right? The newborn, 4 months, that you don't really have any other options between breast milk and formula, which is why this is so important, especially for moms like Alexandra.
Yeah, and that is actually why I don't know if you so right now with the government, right? The Operation Fly formula is actually flying in hypoallergenic formula as a first priority,
Mhm.
which I appreciate as a pediatrician because these are the formulas that are needed for medical issues, right? We need formula for everyone who's formula feeding, but babies who have a cow milk protein allergy like your son can't take the regular generic or regular other formulas. So
Mhm,
I
mhm.
appreciate that that is what was mobilized first and foremost. If we're going to have to stratify, which is going to be priority, that was shipped to Indiana and now it's going to be dispersed. I have no insight as to how it's getting dispersed, how it's going to end up on shelves, but these are all U.S. These are all European international formulas. A lot of them are coming from manufacturers. For example, Gerber or Nestle, right? They don't have plants here, but they have plants out in the EU. They're bringing their formula. So these are companies that are known
Mhm.
to the United States, and obviously there's a lot of regulation to make sure it's safe. But I hope well, two things. I hope we can get those on the shelves soon, and I hope if they are not familiar formulas to you, that you know that they are vetted for, that they are hypoallergenic. That's going to be the next step in education that a lot of pediatricians and infant nutrition experts are going to have to be involved with, saying, "Hey, here is this European formula. I know it doesn't look like Nutramigen or Alimentum,
Mhm,
but
mhm,
here is
mhm.
why it's similar. It does not contain the cow milk protein." Because I don't know about you, reading the back of a formula can is very complicated, and I don't expect the regular parent to know what to make of it, and so that is something that I think is going to be really important in the next month, is getting the formula and also improving education on how we teach families about these different formulas, and we may need to learn about them too, right? Well, I've never seen this before,
Oh my
but
gosh.
I'm hopeful that you will be able to go to a more than 1 week supply, that you will now be able to get to a 2 week, and then eventually a 3 week, and then eventually just have your supply until you can transition your
Mm.
child to either cow's milk later in life or a plant-based alternative if your child still has the milk protein allergy.
And Alexandra, do you have any questions for Dr. Mona that you want to ask? I'm sure you probably do. Go ahead.
Yes. With the switch, I know we don't have enough information at this point, but in your medical profession, like, do you think, like, let's say I go to the store now and hopefully I can get my hands on one of these European brands. So,
Mhm.
do you like suggest maybe giving him one bottle of his Nutramigen and then one bottle of the new one to slowly kind of introduce him to this, or is it so compatible that it's unlikely to have any maybe effect on him?
This is a great question, and a question that I think is applicable to if anyone who's trying a new formula, right? Whether it's a hypoallergenic formula or a formula that's not hypoallergenic. So it depends on the baby. I describe brands. So if you're looking, I'm going to use the big American brands. Let's Alimentum and Nutramigen. Which one is your child on?
Nutramigen.
Nutramigen. Okay, so Nutramigen is an Enfamil brand, and Alimentum is Similac. Just using the two major brands in the United States. Now,
Mm.
there's also, remember, generic hypoallergenic formula that's now available on the market in the United States. But just say we have a new brand coming in, for example, HIP. I'm going to use HIP as a very common European brand, okay? So what
Mm.
you can do, it really depends on your baby. Some babies won't taste the difference. Some babies, they know the difference, like adults, between Coke and Pepsi, right? Like I use that example. Like an adult can taste Coke and be like, no, this isn't Pepsi. A baby could
Mhm,
have
mhm.
that very distinct taste preference that they'll drink two different formulas and be like, I don't really like this one. So
Oh wow.
my advice is try it alone. So for example, like just say we're getting a new formula, a HIP. I'm just gonna use the name, okay? You're gonna try it alone. If your baby, and just be patient with him, get into that dark room. Don't worry about it because they sense the energy too. I've been there as a formula feeding mom. So just really offer it. If he goes like this and spits it out or is not taking it, then what you can do is either that formula or the next feeding, if he, is still being finicky, is mix it half and half. So it's
Mm.
going to be a chemistry experiment, right? So just say your child takes like 6 ounces. I'm just using an example, okay? Or at 3.5, maybe use 4 ounces, okay? So you're going to prepare 2 ounces of your formula for Nutramigen, and then 2 ounces of formula for the new formula. You have to prepare them separately because they have to be mixed correctly, and then you would combine them into one bottle. So now you have the taste of the old one, but the taste of the new one to transition them to a new bottle. I always like to give babies a chance first at transitioning. So that's why I like the method of see what he can do. And if he can't, just say he drinks it, half of it, not even, then you can take what you have. If you're using it right away, it's not contaminated or anything. You can do the half and half and then see if he takes it. And if he does, you give that for a few days, and then eventually you can kind of go to a full bottle of the new formula. I think this is a great question and something that I think is very important for us to talk about, because I think you hear about all the, okay, don't do this, do this. But now this is a reality that a lot of families are having to transition to something new. And that stress of them not taking it can also be a reality. And I've been there. My child did transition from 2 different formulas and hated one of them. And we did this sort of reassurance, gentle understanding. You got this. And he kept spitting it up. So then we went to a new one. And then the transition was quicker once that little taste was introduced. And so I hope that's helpful, because it is a great question.
Yes. No, that's extremely helpful, because that's like your concern. You just want to make sure that, obviously it's a sense of relief knowing we're going to be able to have an alternative brand for this hypoallergenic formula. But, like you said, every kid is different. Hopefully they transition and accept it as easily as they do, the formula they're on. So that is extremely helpful. Thank you.
Of course. And I really hope that, you can keep at least your Nutramigen supply going. You may not even need to get the foreign formula now that there's more formula coming on the market. Maybe you'll have more access to the one that you normally take, so I'm hoping that we don't need to do that. But I think this will be helpful if in chance that you have to transition to another one.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Alexandra, I know your time is short. Were there any other questions you had?
Just maybe regarding I'm kind of in the crucial time frame, under that 4 months where formula is our only alternative. If this doesn't seem to, I'm hoping with the shipment, but do you suggest maybe introducing purees a little sooner, so that way, implementing that, I can cut back on his formula intake? Or do you, just suggest continuing this?
This is a great question and another great segue. So the minimum age, there's age and developmental readiness. And developmental readiness is actually much more important to me than age for introduction of puree. So minimum is 4 months. And the reason we recommend minimum 4 months, regardless if your child's an all-star and showing signs of readiness, is we need developmental maturity of the stomach. Meaning it's not safe to introduce food to a 2-month-old or a 3-month-old, because their digestive system may not be able to handle infections, may not be able to handle the proteins and variety that is in our table food, correct? So minimum is going to be 4 months of age as a minimum. But let's talk about signs of readiness. So just say your child's 3.5 and is now approaching the 4-month mark, and there's still a shortage, right? You can start introducing puree if your child is having good head control, so that not doing this, okay? Good head control, has an interest in taking the puree. So for example, you have the spoon in your hand and they're going, right? If you try to put their spoon to the mouth and they're going like this, or just staring at you, they're not ready. They haven't figured out that this is how we eat, right? So they need to have good head control. They need to have an interest in feeding. And when you put the food, let's just use applesauce as an example. When you put the applesauce in the mouth, they should be able to move the food from the front to the back of their mouth. They can't just spit it back out at you, right? That means that they also may need more time. They haven't lost the tongue thrust reflex that kids need to lose before they can start eating food. These are actually very important things. So my son was ready for puree at 4 months. But this is, like we said, every kid is different, right? Some kids are not ready until 5. Some could say, oh my gosh, at 3 months, my kid was trying to eat my food. But from a developmental perspective, head steadiness, an interest in the food, and then also they need to be at least 4 months from a digestive maturity standpoint. And then the last comment I have is that even if you do introduce the food as early as 4 months, I don't expect a significant reduction in the formula intake. I think that's it's a misconception, because they're still not going to take that much to say that, okay, you're not going to have any, your formula is going to cut in half. I normally see the formula reduction, like just say a child was taking like 32 ounces, okay? I
Right.
normally see the formula reduction happen closer to about 7 months, 8 months. But what this can do is stretch just ever so slightly the amount,
Okay.
right? Maybe instead of taking a 4 ounce bottle, he'll take like a 3 ounce bottle because he had some pureed peas, correct? And in your situation, because of your milk protein allergy for your son, of course, you're going to avoid dairy milk protein products. Clear with your pediatrician when that introduction can happen. But most pediatricians say, don't let that be one of the first things we introduce. Start other things.
Okay.
And then also that would be something we do later.
Okay.
Mhm.
Great.
And Alexandra, we'll go ahead and let you go. Thank you so
Yes,
much.
yes.
Thank you so much.
We
You're
appreciate
so
your time. Take
welcome.
care.
Best
Good.
of luck. Yes.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. No problem.
Thank you, Dr. Bona. I know we're hitting on a
Yeah.
bunch of different subjects. Julia, sorry, was there something you wanted to ask?
I mean, so, you mentioned a lot, this shouldn't have happened. Do you think measures are being taken now to prevent this from happening again?
Yeah, well, I'm so excited to see what's going to happen to change things. Like, I know this sounds like why would she be excited about a formula shortage? Because for far too long, so I think, I don't know, maybe people might find it useful, like how this kind of happened in the first place, maybe just briefly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's go ahead and start there, how we got here. Yeah.
So there are actually 5 major manufacturing plants in the country that create formula. It's strict for a reason, right? Because of regulation from the FDA. They want to make sure everything's safe and there's checks and balances and all of the things that need to happen. Infant formula is the most regulated food because it is a source of food in the United States, which is awesome. But on the flip side, if one plant goes down, which is what happened in February with the Chronobacter risk. So Chronobacter is a type of bacteria that was found to be in some lots of Similac, okay? So they had to shut down that entire plant in Michigan in February. Now, when that happens, that's one of 5 manufacturing plants that go down. That entire company, so Abbott is one of the companies that oversees Similac. Abbott, Mead Johnson, and I believe there is Nestle and Perrigo. There are only a few companies that oversee the entire market of infant formula in the United States, whereas other developed countries have more diversity of companies. So with one company being affected with a recall, right, and with one plant going down, that supplied about 40% of the market for formula. And unfortunately, there was no checks and balances to make sure that the other plants, the other companies were making up for the loss of that plant and that production line. And that was unfortunately something that just was not talked about. I mean, for months this was happening, right? Since February, that went down. And I think people were just saying, okay, well, we'll see how things go. And unfortunately, it didn't go in the right direction, right? People needed formula, and it got taken off the shelf. So we lost, at some point in May, like earlier this month, we lost about 40% of our supply. And that's why you're seeing all those empty shelves right there, and this is a huge problem. So what I think is going to happen, and I hope will happen for the future, and this is just looking at a little bit of positive hope in this situation. I hope they can diversify the market a little bit. When you have 4 or 5 major companies dominating the market, there's not as much diversity, right? And this has kind of happened because of the regulations. And for a new company to enter the market, it's a lot of money and it's a lot of time. There are 2 new formula companies that are actually similar to EU standards, ByHeart and Bobby. These are now US formula companies that are trying to break through. And they actually now have a manufacturing plant. They now have, are trying to break through the very strict US market. I think what this is going to do is cause a lot of conversation about how we regulate formula. Can we diversify the marketplace a little bit more? And what are we going to do if, in the fact that this does happen again, where a plant does get shut down? Because I want to be clear that there was nothing. Risk happens, right? We know that. I think people do their best, but just like lettuce can get recalled, or some vegetable,
Sure.
this happens. So I don't want us to think that, oh well, now this is going to keep happening again. But we definitely want it to be a place where, if it does, parents in the United States are not scrambling for the last month. I would say this has been going on for a month, where we've been seeing bare shelves, and we have a large formula feeding population in the United States, which is like another issue where how can we educate families on infant feeding. If a family wants to choose breastfeeding, do we have resources for them? In America, we don't have a lot of resources for breastfeeding. So even if a family wants to breastfeed, they actually end up formula feeding, even if that wasn't their decision, because of lack of paid leave, lack of resources, lack of pumping time at work. There's so many reasons why I see moms stop breastfeeding before they desire to stop. And that is a huge conversation. Many parents choose to formula feed. That is their choice from the beginning. But a large majority are forced into it. And that is a reality in the United States because of the lack of the things that I mentioned. So I think this is going to open up so much conversations about regulation and so much conversations about how we educate families on feeding and support families on formula education and breastfeeding education, because this is all a big picture on infant nutrition and support for parents. And that is where it's all coming down to.
Yeah, and Dr. Mona, you mentioned such a key thing. It's the most regulated food out there, right? It's not just like we can go and easily replace what is so regulated by the FDA, maybe buying formula from Mexico or from Canada. I mean, obviously, as we saw, the government had to get involved because of those regulations. What is your biggest concern right now with the shortage?
My biggest concern are the families like Alexandra's who have a child who is medically needing a formula and can't find that formula. There is no other option for that child. And that is medically very dire to me, right? Like I was telling some of my families that right now COVID is surging, but right now the formula shortage is causing me more stress than COVID. And that's saying a lot that's saying a lot given that we're in a pandemic, right? I mean, children need to eat, meaning infants and newborns need food. And a cow milk protein allergy, it's not as easy as saying, okay, well then just give your baby this, or maybe, start, breastfeed. Even breastfeeding moms who have a child with cow milk protein allergy, they have, they could remove dairy from their diet, or they could do, remove certain foods, but they still sometimes need to go to formula because of how strict that is. Imagine having to look at labels and miss something, and then your child gets a, reaction to the cow milk protein. So that is my biggest concern. And then I'm also concerned about our younger babies that don't have the option, like I said, over 6 months of food, or maybe doing cow's milk or a plant-based alternative until they can find formula. I am concerned about that under 6-month crowd, those children with medical issues. If your child's older than 6 months and definitely older than 9 months, you can start to introduce some cow's milk or a plant-based alternative if you cannot find your formula, correct? Because this is actually something in a placeholder that's okay. But our babies under 6 months, this is who I'm trying to help. I've advised a lot of my families that are closer to 9-10 months. I'm saying, hey, look, ideally, we would love to go closer to 1 year for cow's milk. But what I'm trying to do is the more we can get the message out that if your child is older, then that will be some formula that we can save for our younger babies, right? The ones who can't do an alternative. So if you are listening to this and you have an older child that's closer to 9 months, I would highly consider cow's milk or a plant-based alternative. If your child's older than 6 months to 9, ideally formula is still the best. But if you can't find it because you've searched and you can't, cow's milk is an alternative until you can find the formula. And then you want to make sure that you continue to do iron-rich foods with your diet, lentils, green vegetables, things like that, as puree or self-feeding. But that is kind of my hope. I really hope we're not in this for more than another 3 weeks. I do believe that it's going to get better in my just hopeful outlook, that because we're flying in formula, because all other manufacturing plants are pretty much working 24/7 now, because of the Defense Production Act, all hands on deck, all supplies are going directly to formula production as a priority. This is huge. So we are going to probably see more production. But remember, like we said earlier, there is regulation still. Just because all hands are on deck doesn't mean that formula is going to come on the shelves tomorrow from US manufacturing plants, because there is regulation of making sure it's safe, making sure it passes nutrition testing, making sure it passes all the checks and balances, which I think is really important. But that is why the international shipment of formula is going to be important until we can get our own American supply on the shelves.
Right, because
really,
sorry, go ahead, Joel.
I'm sorry, Marissa. I was just going to say, it's so ironic, right? These regulations, which are in themselves meant to protect our children, that's kind of what's getting in the way, right? And slowing down the system of bringing more formula of getting
Ironic.
more formula to babies. Wow. Yeah.
Ironic.
Marissa,
And
sorry,
you
you
know,
were going
the
to say something.
yeah,
Oh,
and the
sorry. Go ahead, Dr.
EU.
Mona.
Oh yeah, and it's very ironic, but and the EU actually has very strict regulations too, I would say. They are actually, that's where we're getting a lot of the formula from, the European Union. And there's always been a lot of comparison between the US formula market and the EU market. And I wonder if this will change a lot of the conversation on, you know, they're very strict, but they also are a little more lenient on some things and more strict on other things, meaning in their formulas, they don't worry so much about iron level, meaning we, in American formulas, there is more iron in our formula than there is in some of the European formula. European formulas still have iron, but not as much as US formulas, right? So I wonder if this is going to change the conversation of let's revisit the science. Can we lower restrictions, change regulations? Is there benefit in doing so? While still keeping our children, you know, thriving and growing and all of that. So I'm not a formula nutrition scientist. There's way more to it than I even know as a general pediatrician, but I'm very intrigued on the conversations that will come out of this.
Well, and just because I think there's one other point that I know in talking with you, you want to make very clear to parents who are looking at alternatives. You know, there's a lot of questions out there. Can I dilute the formula that I have to make it stretch longer? And can I make baby formula at home if I found a recipe online? What are your answers to those very critical questions?
I've talked to you about this before, Marissa. This is like a really hard time where I get it. In a stressful situation, you are desperate. I'm not going to deny that at all, that I do believe these parents mean well. So when I talk about these things, it's not to shame anybody. It's not to say, well, how could you do this? It's to say, let me explain why I don't want you to do this, okay? Because I get it. I know how hard it is. And I think these well-meaning parents are just trying to feed their babies. So the comment about dilution. So when you prepare formula, you know, you mix scoops of formula with water, right? And so on the packaging, it'll tell you how to mix the formula. When you start, what some parents are doing is they're making, in order to make the can of powdered formula last longer, they are putting more water than is recommended for each bottle. So that's over diluting it, right? So let's just say we have 1 scoop of formula to 2 ounces of water, which is typical, okay? So now they're doing, 1 scoop of formula with 4 ounces of water or 3 ounces of water. What that does is over dilutes the formula. So not only does that make the nutritional composition of that bottle of milk formula not what is recommended, but it also adds more water to the child's body. Now, the problem with that is that our babies under 6 months, especially, their kidneys are not fully formed yet. Their kidneys are still developing. They are not able to filter out large amounts of water besides what is recommended in formula. So that's why we actually recommend not to give a baby under 6 months drinking water, right? Because we don't want a family to risk giving their child too much water, and that can lead to electrolyte abnormalities. What that means is when your body contains more water than it can filter out, it can cause the sodium levels to go down in your body, and that can lead, in a very dire circumstance, that can lead to seizure activity. As a pediatrician, I have seen that in my training. I have seen what we call in the medical world hyponatremia, which means low sodium, because of diluting formula, which has led to seizures. And that child presents in the emergency room with seizures, and we're looking for the reason, and we're like, what's going on? And we're like, well, I don't understand. And then we get the information. The parent says, oh yeah, I've been mixed. This is how my formula looks, and it looks like water. And we're like, uh-oh, that's the reason, right? And so it's really important to remember the why. The second thing is homemade formula. Similar concept, that the nutritional composition is so regulated and tight in the formula that's on our shelves that what is being created at home is not nutritionally adequate for a developing body. And also, your home is not a sterile environment. Yes, I understand that there was a risk of that bacteria in that plant, and that can happen, but this is rare. We are more likely to have contamination in our home. You clean a surface, or you clean your pot, and you had raw eggs, and then now you've transferred salmonella to your home, your bottle. You want to make sure that you are not doing that, making stuff at home and mixing your own concoction, because of sterility and also for the nutritional composition. These are two things that I think I'm hearing circulate a lot right now, especially large social media accounts like celebrities are sharing their own homemade formula recipes, which they don't even formula feed, or they've never had to make it. I'm like, how are we even doing that, right? Like, I saw some major athlete who does not even have an infant right now just share a homemade formula recipe, and I'm like, you're not even making it. Like, would you give that to your own baby? Like, that's not something that we would even recommend. And it's very hard right now. And I'm happy that we answered that, because that's something we definitely need to squash, because it is more risky than, than doing that, because that's not something that we want for babies. And we don't want to see babies in the hospital with things like that. Already, I know in Cincinnati, there was a couple reports of babies coming in with over dilution. I've heard from ER colleagues around the country that I have a group with, that they are hearing some families come in with homemade formula and stomach issues, like not tolerating it, vomiting, stuff like that. So this is a real issue that we really need to get out there, that this is not something that's safe.
And that was the over dilution. Did you also talk about making at home?
Yes,
Okay.
I did talk about that. Yeah. And it's both of those are, things that are happening right now. And again, I get that it's stressful. I get that we need to feed our babies. As like if your baby is under 0 to 6 months, or sorry, if your baby is 0 to 6 months, if you can't find your formula, remember, have friends search around the country if you have the capability of do that, because sometimes it's stocked in certain places and not stocked where you are. Use your resources, get on social media groups. So Facebook, for example, has been very helpful. Just say you are in Broward County, for example, you would join the Broward County Facebook group, right? For moms. A lot of moms are on social media. And then you would say, hey, look, I'm really looking for my formula. Does anyone have any, or know where I can find it? Or maybe take a picture of empty shelves. These are all things that we can do. Last, make sure you ask your pediatrician's office. Like, I know for our office, we sometimes get some supply. We don't have as much of a supply as we did in months past, but we may have a couple samples to get you through a week, or to get you through a few days, So make sure you utilize those 3 resources to get the formula you need, so that you do not have to rely on these kind of things that people are saying, the homemade formula or the dilution, because it's not safe.
Thank you so much for that really important information. I do want to touch on a little bit more of what's happening on the federal level to try to move this along much faster. I know you already spoke about Operation Fly Formula. We've been reporting, at least for the last 10 days, that some of the manufacturers have increased production 30 to 50%. But of course, as you alluded to earlier, that's going to take a week or 2 or 3 to have us see it right on the shelves and actually see that that production in action. But also, I know the Biden administration had authorized and invoked the Defense Production Act, which you kind of touched on as well, right? So that essentially is going to make the orders like these manufacturers their priority now. Whatever ingredients they need, whatever they have to do to make sure that they're making this formula again, that they're prioritized over other orders, right? Can you touch on that as to what's happening to try to make this happen as fast as possible?
Yeah, so this is actually in a very interesting time. So I'm going to talk about the Defense Production Act in more detail, which I alluded to earlier, like you mentioned. So the Defense Production Act, the last time we actually had that invoked was at the beginning of the pandemic with PPE, the personal protective equipment, for myself, my husband, who are both in healthcare, which is so wild to me that in our lifetime, like as 30-year-old, whatever, and my husband, twice has the Defense Production Act been invoked, and both times have been in the last 2.5 years, which is nuts to me. Wild. So what it does is that when you talk about the Defense Production Act, so the example that kind of is running around is that, just say you have a child, just say you have milk, right? So cow's milk is used in some formula, okay? So ice cream shop, Ben and Jerry's, is like, hey, we need 20 gallons of milk. And Enfamil, a formula company, is like, we also need 20 gallons of milk to make our formula. Enfamil will get the priority. So what that means with the Defense Production Act is any ingredient that is used in infant formula, so there's many ingredients, the priority goes to the formula manufacturers first and foremost. So they've overseen anything. So don't be surprised if you start to see your favorite ice cream not on the shelf, or some other item, right? I don't think it's going to be that major, but all hands on deck, meaning all ingredients are going towards formula manufacturing. And all mobilization is happening. So I know, for example, certain major companies like Enfamil, they are making sure that all of their trucks are going unloaded first. So it sounds little, right? It sounds like, well, what does that make a difference? But it is in the long run. Just say you have a shipment of formula / other things coming to Publix, okay? They are going to unload the formula first. That is a priority. Now, I don't have any insight as to is that actually happening, But the idea here is that everybody needs to be looking at formula manufacturing, and that is a priority to not only get it made, regulated, but also get it shipped and on the shelves quicker than any other product that we are creating that has those same ingredients. So same thing with the Defense Production Act. When PPE was made, all the materials that go into making PPE, plastics and paper, whatever you're using, everything is going to go towards that. And it does help. I mean, we saw that with the production of PPE, it was able to mobilize. So I'm hopeful, but that one step that I have to ask is, or have to reiterate, is that there is obviously some regulation of the quality, right? In terms of making sure that it's safe to go onto market, all of that, which is why the other bill that was passed in the government recently was funding towards the FDA to oversee all of this. Now, I can't speak to what amount is needed for the FDA. I can't ever speak to that stuff. I don't understand all the financial aspect of the government. But what that is doing is the FDA needs to now oversee all of the formula coming into the country, making sure that that's all safe and nutritionally adequate for standards. And if it's not, making sure that that's okay to put on the shelves. That's what's happening with this Operation Fly formula. And also putting all hands on deck to rev up personnel to go and make sure that all of the plants that are producing the formula, all of the formula being made, is regulated. So that's more people, which means more funding. And again, I can't speak as to whether that amount makes sense, right? I can just say that this makes sense in the overall picture, that we need to have all resources to get more formula in a safe way. And then the second part is making sure that this doesn't happen again, is like the take home for sure.
Well, and what's kind of interesting, I was actually privy to a press briefing on this when this was first invoked, this Defense Production Act, and a lot of it is the stuff you don't even think about. They were talking about, it's not just the ingredients in the actual formula. They're talking about metal cans. They're talking about labels. And literally everything that you need to get that, on the shelf. All of that is being prioritized so that it's available to those manufacturers and they can get it done as soon as possible. So I just, it makes you think that they're thinking more on a larger scale than just what the baby's eating. It's literally every single piece that's needed for that, which is so important, obviously.
Yeah.
I also wanted to talk about the legislation that was passed. I think just last week, I think the president even signed it while he was overseas, that essentially expands flexibilities that are granted to governments considering the WIC program, which I'm not as knowledgeable about, again, because I don't have a baby in that age group. But, we're talking about the nutrition program for women, infants, and children. Kind of, apparently they're responsible for ordering like half of the formula that's out there and making that available to people. So can you kind of talk about that and how that works into this?
Yeah, and I don't have and I don't have all the details on that one per se. Like, I don't know exactly like what's going to happen from here on out. But what I can say is I can talk about WIC in general. So WIC is women, infant, children. So WIC is actually very, very much used in Florida and around the country. So every state has their own WIC department, and then WIC is just a national thing as well. And WIC helps support a lot of families who are lower socioeconomic status. So you have to qualify for the benefits of WIC. I don't have the exact threshold of what your income has to be, but these families utilize the WIC office not only for screening for like lead and hemoglobin. They actually have other visits as well when they go to the WIC. So they not only see us as pediatricians, but they go to the WIC office. At the WIC office, they can get samples of formula. And it's covered, right? It's free, so that if they can't afford it, because formula, if you look at it over a long period, is expensive. One can cost like $25, depending on what formula you're on. So they have a program so that they can provide that formula for their families. So I believe the legislation obviously is increasing resources to WIC to procure formula, but also for education for the staff, alternatives for the WIC, alternatives to formula, meaning in terms of if this formula is not available, we can use this one. One thing that I do see that has been very difficult with WIC, which I hope will also change, is WIC approves certain formulas. They have partnerships with certain brands. And the problem with that is that this situation, right? So now if the marketplace goes down and one WIC office had a partnership with Enfamil or had a partnership with Similac, but one of them goes offline because of a recall or whatever, they need to fill that void. So it kind of goes, that's what we were kind of seeing, that if Similac was the one that was affected with the recall, right, then their supply chain had a major issue. Well, what are those WIC offices going to supply their families with? They need education on, here are safe alternatives, Enfamil or another brand or a similar brand in the Similac family, getting the production of all those other formulas. So that is what this is doing, is helping kind of expand the coverage, but also just expanding the resources for WIC. And I do believe that this is a priority. As we know, I mentioned earlier that I am most concerned about the kids of 6 months, children with medical issues, and I am most concerned about families in the lower socioeconomic bracket. Now, many families formula feed and are in various socioeconomic brackets, right? We have families who have means, families who, work many jobs and are, government assistance programs. I do believe that I am very concerned about the families who are lower socioeconomic status that may not have the time off to go search for formula, may not have a vehicle to go from store to search for formula, may not have a friend in another state that can ship formula, right? We have to understand that when you are in certain socioeconomic statuses, you have a little bit, doesn't mean that it doesn't suck to be in the situation, but you have a little bit of flexibility in, yes, it's not easy, but you can get it if you, drive around or go have a family member from California ship it. But a lot of families don't have that, right? A lot of families, they're the supplier of their family's resources. They're working multiple jobs. And so WIC is something that I believe, and I've always believed, should be heavily supported and heavily. I believe that any government program should be that's focusing on infant and children should always be supported, because children are, they need things. They need food, they need shelter, they need developmental assistance. So I do believe that this is something that is beneficial, but I will be staying up to date on details, what it means in my practice, what I'm seeing, because it matters to me that not only are the funds going to the right place, that we're actually seeing something happen with it, right? And there's so much that we don't know with the funding and all that I don't even know, but I would like to see that things are moving and that people are getting the resources that we hope we could get so that our families are fed.
Absolutely. Dr. Mona, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time, your knowledge, and thank you for breaking things down. I mean, this is a complicated issue with more than one cause. And so I certainly feel like I better understand it after hearing from you. And thank you so much as well for, the recommendations. What do you do if you don't have it? What you can do and what you can't.
Oh, you're so welcome. I'm happy to be here. This is obviously a very important topic. Hopefully we won't have to be doing this again, but maybe if we need to do it again, if this is still an issue and I'm seeing new guidance being released, we can always do it again, but I'm just so glad to join you all today.
Marissa, you're muted. Marissa, sorry, you're muted.
I was just going to say, I learn more and more every time that we talk. So it's an education, even for those of us that aren't in the situation, but certainly for those of us that can keep an eye out for others who we know are. And it's just, it's so wonderful to have you here with us today. So thank you, and keep up the good work with all your patients.
Thank you so much, both of you. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Mona. I also want to take a moment and thank all of our NBC6 staff behind the scenes. Thank you, Gabby. Thank you, Daniela. Thank you, Jermel, as always. If I missed anyone, thank you, everybody. Appreciate your support and being able to get the word out like
and
this.
And for those of you who have joined us online, thank you for your time, and we appreciate you watching Moms with Mike. Take care, everyone.